I'm privileged to spend time today with Dr. Cedric Jimerson, who is a World War II veteran. I've interviewed a number of World War II veterans before, but I've never interviewed anybody who's a doctor during World War II.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's pretty rarefied air for me, and I'm guessing there's probably not a whole lot of you left out there.
That's very true.
Yeah. We hate to say this, certainly wouldn't mention it if it was a woman, but you're 97 years old.
Yes, sir.
And you're looking very fit. They must be taking good care of you here. You're eating your fruit in the morning, right?
Yes.
Okay, and your vegetables at night?
The good food, yeah.
Yeah, you're looking very fine. You got your medical training where and when, Dr. Jimerson?
I got my medical training at the Cornell University Medical College in Manhattan, New York. And that was in 1939 to 1943. And then I trained at Bellevue Hospital in New York City, Manhattan, the old hospital, and at Cancer Memorial Hospital, the famous hospital for cancer. Mm-hmm. And from there I went to the Bronx Veterans Administration Hospital. And there I took a thoracic surgical residency for 2.5 years. I also trained at the New York Hospital. I had a residency in surgery there. I had a substitute internship in surgery at Strong Memorial Hospital in Rochester, New York. I had a 4th year of a surgical residency in New Britain General Hospital. And after that, I completed a 6-month residency in pathology. So I had training at many different university hospitals.
Suffice it to say you were well trained.
I was well trained and well prepared by great surgeons, great medical men in New York City. They prepared me for the challenges that I would meet when I came to Reading. To practice solo in general surgery.
You chose this profession, why? And as you're growing up, had you ever contemplated being a doctor, being a surgeon, taking on the position that you did?
I did. I think it started at Boy Scout camp, Camp Gorton, Lake Juanita, New York. Mm-hmm. Our camp physician was from Ithaca, and he really was the physician for the team, all the athletic teams. And he persuaded me. But unfortunately, my father died when I was 13, in 1933, of, I don't know if you ever heard of it, lockjaw.
He was only about 41 years old.
Yes, he was 41. He was born in 1892. And so he left my mother with 4 little children, all under 13 years of age. So I thought then I would have to go to work and take care of the family instead of going to college.
You seemed like a most unlikely candidate given that family profile of going on to medical school.
Yeah. I had to work my way through both Cornell University and Cornell University Medical College.
When you're in college, not only are the war clouds forming over Europe, Benito Mussolini is on the march. Certainly the Japanese have invaded in the Far East, and the Germans are annexing, and they're into Czechoslovakia and Austria at that time. And September of '39, war breaks out in earnest. There's a declaration of war by France and Great Britain and some of the Allied powers, but not the United States. Can you reach back in your mind's eye? Can you project, looking back, could you project forward saying, hey, I may have to put this medical training to use in a war environment? Had you ever contemplated that as you're getting this training?
Yes, I was aware of that. As a matter of fact, I took ROTC at Cornell University. We rode the polo ponies up there. I was in the cavalry. And then I took advanced ROTC in medical school because I wanted to become an officer when I came in. Actually, later it was all automatic if you graduated from medical school. You became a first lieutenant. But then I was sure after these developments occurred that I'd be drafted.
You fully expected it, so
Yes.
there was no surprise.
Yes.
You were of age, and it was likely you were going to move into theater.
Oh, they were desperate for doctors. As a matter of fact, they were drafting some doctors up to 50 years of age, taking them out of their general practices.
What's your family's sense of you going over into a combat zone and using your medical skills there?
Well, it was very difficult for my mother. She was a widow. She taught school in a one-room schoolhouse for $1 a day. And she was trying to take care of 4 of us children. We lost one brother while he was in Cornell with me of kidney disease.
Mm.
And she said that she would manage the household if we would earn our own way to college. And all the remaining 3 did that. But it was very difficult for her because I had a younger brother who went to the Pacific. So I went to Europe, he went to the South Pacific. And she was left there with just my sister.
So you're saying goodbye to your mom and your sister. What month, what year, what's the mood in that house when you're saying goodbye?
That was in December 1943. I was drafted on December 31st, 1943, and was sworn in at Carlisle Barracks.
You say goodbye to your mom when, and your sister?
I said goodbye to my mom about a week before, and I said goodbye to my sweetheart just before I got on the train in New York City.
Who cried harder, your sweetheart or your mom?
Both of them.
How old was your sister at the time you said goodbye to her?
My sister was 3 years younger than I was,
Okay.
born at 21.
So this is a very tough moment, given that your dad's gone. You've lost a brother. You have a brother serving in the Pacific, and you have a sister and mom at home.
Yeah.
How hard is that on you? We talked about their tears. How tough is that on you as a person saying goodbye?
Well, I was very concerned and worried about the family, but I was determined. And I got a break when I was I did work my way through Cornell University. But while I was there, I was one of 7 students who was selected to go to medical school out of the 3rd year. And that was a good break because up until that time, I was majoring in chemistry and physics, realizing that I didn't have the finances to make it to medical school.
Hmm.
But this saved me 1 year, a senior year, the cost of college, you know, the tuition and cost of living, and enabled me to go.
It's the height of the war in 43. We haven't gotten to D-Day in June of 44. Did you go over on a troop ship? How did you enter Europe, and when?
I went on a troop ship. It was an old Liberty ship, and the Atlantic Ocean was very wild, and we rocked and rolled. Moreover, we were taking roundabout turns all the way because the U-boats were knocking down the ships so frequently that between them and the Luftwaffe, we lost many loads of men and supplies.
There had to be fear on board the ship.
Of course.
And I just talked to one of your friends here, Lucien Fisi, and he said he was on a ship with a brother or two, and they had a plan as to where they were going to go if the ship got hit. Do you feel like your plan was adequate and your lifeboats were adequate?
I don't know. I must tell you that I was in several branches of the Army when I was still in the United States. I don't think the Army knew what they wanted to do with me. I went to Carlisle Barracks for medical officers training, and they sent me to Camp Swift, or Camp Pickett in Virginia. And from there, I was sent to Stark General Hospital. And that was deluxe. And after a week, they sent us out a questionnaire of where we'd like to go and what we'd like to do.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I'd like to do surgery. I'd like to stay right here. So it was no more than a week or two that I got notice to proceed to Atlanta, Georgia, to join the anti-aircraft, the World's second anti-aircraft. And after a time there, and by the way, they were sharpshooters. They could bring down the Luftwaffe planes.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, the submarines, German submarines, the U-boats, were right off our coast, and they were knocking them. But then I was called to the infantry, Camp Blanding, Florida, where they were doing forced marches and drilling all the time. And then from there, they sent me back to Camp Pickett for a short time, and then back to Fort Bragg,
North
where
Carolina.
I was in the 940th Field Artillery. And that was quite an experience, being out in the firing range. But it wasn't until about 6 months later that I was sent to New York City with the 663rd Medical Clearing Company. And I was with that unit going overseas and the rest of my service until after VE Day when I came back.
You certainly had a wide range of experience. Let's take you to the shores of Europe. You land where and when?
We landed in Liverpool,
In England.
and I can't tell you the exact date, but it was in the early winter of '44. And we landed in the dark. We didn't know where we were going, and we thought we were going to Africa. But we were unloaded there and climbed that steep hill in Liverpool with the cobblestones in full pack. Our packs were over 75 pounds.
Mm.
And our dentist, Captain Lebo, he was a favorite of the soldiers. He suffered a heart attack on the way and died then. In fact, subsequently, I was sent to London to a mass funeral to honor him. And we saw hundreds and hundreds of caskets, wooden caskets, of all these dead soldiers, most of them aviators who had died, and they all were buried in a mass funeral. Very impressive.
A very early taste of the consequences of war.
Yes. I got a taste of it just before I went overseas. I was in the field artillery at the time, and I got a call, an emergency call to the headquarters of Battery B. I went down, and lo and behold, one of my dear friends, a handsome young guy who had just graduated from Harvard, had committed suicide.
Mm.
And he was sitting there in his chair, and in his lap was half of his skull, his brains, and his carbine. And he had been so frightened about going overseas.
Mm.
We saw that other times too. Just before we crossed the Rhine, there were many soldiers. It was claimed that they were shooting the officers, although I didn't see that.
Mm-hmm.
But,
You're actually rendering medical care when you're in Western Europe.
yes.
Could you share a little bit about some of what you did, what you saw, who you treated,
Yes.
and how that affected you?
Most of the time, except for 6 months when I was in the combat zone, I was back in the communication zones, and there we saw all kinds of injuries. But I didn't get into the brunt of the combat until, I spent 6 months in that. I was in 2 battlefields, battle campaigns, and got 2 bronze medals for it, 2 stars. But I was in a clearing company which was located behind the collecting company. At the very front, there was a battalion surgeon, which I was at in the USA. And behind us was a field, was a supportable Army unit. Behind that, a station hospital. Behind that, the general hospitals, either in Germany or in the U.S. Most of the work that we were doing were triage, separating those that could go back to service and those that had to go back to the USA or to a better hospital for definitive treatment. So we were doing primarily minor surgery and trying to get the men back to work.
When you say minor surgery, are we talking shrapnel wounds, bullet wounds? Exactly how you're going to define that for us, minor surgery?
Okay. Yes, that was bullet wounds and shrapnel. And there was a acute minor operation that we did that saved many lives. At that time, gunshot wounds of the chest were the most common. And with those gunshot wounds, they were sucking wounds because of the negative pressure in the chest. And so air was coming in with every breath they took. And soon they had a tension pneumothorax, collapsed that lung. As it got more severe, the heart was shifted and the trachea. And it very shortly would lead to death. And someone came up with the idea of a minor operation which consisted of doing a thoracotomy with a trocar cannula. We punctured the chest wall in between the ribs after having closed the gunshot wound. We inserted a rubber tube about this long, hard rubber with a good lumen inside. And over the open end, we tied a condom. And after that was secured, we cut the closed end of the condom. We opened that up, cut across it. And this was a wonderful ball valve effect, so that every breath they took, the condom would collapse and they couldn't suck air in. When they exhaled, it was expelled. And in that way, these men were brought back. The heart was and the trachea were replaced in the mediastinum where they belonged, and they could be transported then to a more permanent unit for surgery, either back in the combat zone, or in England, or Germany, or back to the States.
You were obviously well prepared in your training, but it's also clear there was improvisation when you were out in one of these situations that you described. How about the emotional preparation and the heart part of this, the mind? Were you really adequately prepared for combat casualties in terms of your personal constitution, your emotion, or were there some nights where you laid your head down and say, wow, I'm in over my head here?
That's happened more than once. It was a real shock. None of us were familiar with the tragedy that we were going to be into. The loss of lives, the serious injuries, the destruction of cities, highways, all through Europe. I have pictures in that book of London was destroyed. When we landed in Europe, I was surprised at how the Seine River, where we were supposed to travel, was plugged with sunken ships. And Le Havre was completely destroyed. Now it's a beautiful city, but it was in rambles. And it was just very sad to witness it.
But you're there to help people. It's obvious you rescued lives, you saved lives. Was there some measure of satisfaction? You know, you lay your head down at night and you say, I'm in the middle of the horror of war, but I'm also trained to rescue and save lives. So you had that as a counterpoint.
We had good times and bad times. There had times when you could weep and other times that you could laugh and joke. Yes, that's very true.
Battle of the Bulge or some other memorable events, because the Battle of the Bulge was December 40, 4 January of 45. Were you proximal to that arena?
No, that was just before me. In fact, they got our equipment.
Okay.
So we were held up in England until more came from the States.
Right, but certainly you may have seen combat casualties given the tens of thousands of
yeah.
injuries.
Oh, yes.
When somebody was under your care, I'm sure that there were conversations that unfolded and things that they shared with you. Do any stand out in your mind?
Well, that was a big concern. It was hard to listen to it. These fellows who were vitally wounded and couldn't recover, it was sad taking care of them.
So it was hard.
Oh, yeah. Very
at
hard.
personal level.
Very hard. And it wasn't until VE Day that we were called to set up a displaced or it was a DDT dusting station that we set up right along the Rhine, because at that time there was a outbreak of typhus and cholera, and they were afraid of a widespread epidemic of both of these. So we would dust all of the prisoners of war, all the Germans coming back to their homes. They would have to strip down and go through this dusting to try to prevent it with DDT.
You treated Germans.
Yes.
You intersected with Germans, and clearly they were probably happier to be captured by the Americans than by the Russians.
Right.
So at some level, did you detect relief within the core of the Germans that this thing had ended for them?
It's strange. I had the experience of talking to quite a few Germans who thought that they knew that they were sunk, they were defeated. They thought we were going to team up with them and go on and fight Russia. And in fact, there were orders from headquarters that this should be shut down, no more talk like that. And then, just as VD Day ended, I was sent back to Aachen, and they had a displaced home, displaced persons.
May of 1945.
Right. And at that time, in this camp where I was sent, it had been a camp for Hitler's Jungen for training. And these refugees, I had 9,000 refugees in that camp, and I was in charge medically.
German refugees?
Most of them were Russians.
Russian, okay.
Yeah, there were 5,000 Russians there. There were 2,000 Poles. And the remainder, making up 9,000 people, was from all over Europe.
It's an extraordinary number of Russians ending up where you were located. What was their transit route? Did they come from the Ukraine?
I have no idea.
Okay, all right. I'm just kind of curious.
But it was interesting. I conducted a sick call every morning, and there were only a few in my sick call. So I went over to the Russian camp, and these were huge buildings. And there was a doctor there who really was a nurse, and maybe not even that. But she was treating them with cupping. And she was curing them of every ailment you could conceive of. She had a bucket of alcohol and a large sponge on a stick. She would swab that, then take a cup and swab the inside of the cup, light it with a torch, put it on their back. They would flinch and let out a howl, and that would stay there with the suction for just a few minutes, then zoom, it dropped off and they were better. It was just amazing.
I don't assume that was part of your training that you got medically for what you just described there.
The other interesting part about that was that these Russians were terrible people. They didn't seem to know what toilet tissue was for. They were decorating the trees with toilet tissue. And it was disgusting. We went on inspection of these buildings, and these big rooms lying on the floor, they were all engaging in sex, and it was disgusting. And in one corner of the basement, we found a pile of little embryos. committed, it killed him. We had a troop from the Pennsylvania Division, the 28th.
Legendary.
Yeah, legendary. They were known by the Germans as the Bloody Bucket because they were such fierce fighters, and they had this bloody emblem of Pennsylvania on their helmets, steel helmets. And they would inspect these barracks, find hidden pistols and so forth. They had riots going on. There was an old swimming pool outside, and the Russians used to catch any of their the Polish girls, because they were caught when they were returned. The Polish men cut their hair, big strip right down their back, so they were identified as those who had participated with the Russians.
Mm.
It was interesting. We were, at that time, we were bringing in carloads of potatoes, and they kept running out of potatoes. And then finally they found the source. There was a still, and they were making vodka out of these potatoes and drinking it.
You were exposed to a lot of the horror of war and the disintegration of a culture. I think you've described that well. For many people, they think of Auschwitz, Buchenwald, concentration camps. What did you hear about? What exposure did you have? How proximal were you to concentration camps or detention centers that the Germans?
We had no knowledge of it.
Okay.
Absolutely knew nothing of it. It was a complete shock. We learned after the war.
It was only after they were liberated
Yes.
you got information. Yeah. How long were you in Europe?
A year and a half.
And you went back home when?
I went back home in 46.
So there was a need for your services, obviously, in Europe well after the war was over. So the VE Day, it ends in May of 45, but you don't return until 46.
Yes.
And was there any talk of sending you to the Pacific Theater, like a lot of the men were informed you may be shipping out to the Pacific arena?
They told us we were going.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I was sent to Texas. And when I got there, they turned around and sent me back to Carlisle to take a course in tropical medicine. And it wasn't until I was on my way back to my own camp, to my own outfit, that I heard about the bombing in Japan.
And the decisive end.
That ended it. So then I was the CO there at Camp Swift Regional Hospital was from Cornell.
Hmm.
And he was on the staff there at Camp Memorial Hospital. So we immediately became good friends, and he hired my wife for his private secretary and gave me a job as a ward surgeon. So I did more surgery there than I did during the war. Every day we did it.
Wow. Well, we've run out of time here, but I want to thank you not only for your service to your country in World War II, your service to your community here at Community General Hospital, and also as a president of the Berks County Medical Society.
Thank you very
Dr.
much.
Jimerson.
Thank you, Mark.
That's all the time that we have for today's legislative report. I'm State Representative Mark Gillen. If you have any questions about state-related matters that we can help you with, that contact information will follow on the screen.